Hello and welcome to Global Ideas, an initiative by Hong Kong Baptist University to bring some of the finest minds together to help us understand some of the complex challenges of our times. Now, for those of you who have been following our web pages would know that the focus of this series is to explore what is called the new Cold War. And in this particular episode, what we're putting under the lens is India-China relations. And to help us navigate through the complexities of India-China relations, we have an eminent guest all the way from India. We are delighted and privileged to be joined by Dr. Subramanyam Swamy. Dr. Subramanyam Swamy is a former Harvard professor. He's a 6-time member of Indian Parliament. He has been a Union Cabinet Minister. He's considered an authority over economics, mathematics, and foreign policy. He's one of the rare Indian politicians who is regarded all across the globe. But more importantly, he has played a pivotal role in cementing India-China relations. He has authored dozens of books, including Himalayan Challenge, India-China and Quest for Peace, India's China Perspective, and very interesting, the ideology of India's modern right, and so on. He's immensely popular on social media, where he famously says, "I give as hard as I get." Dr. Swamy, all the way from India, welcome to Global Ideas.
Well, thank you very much. China is one of the countries which I admire. So, and I've long been many times to China. So I welcome in this context, in the present day context, for a discussion like this.
Thank you. We are also joined by Professor Daya Thussu. Professor Daya Thussu is a renowned global scholar of international communication. He is widely known for his extensive publications in the field of media and communications all over the world. He is the founder and managing editor of the Sage journal Global Media and Communication. He has written or edited 20 books and still counting. He has been a distinguished visiting professor and inaugural Disney chair in global media at Tsinghua University, Beijing, and currently teaches at the Hong Kong Baptist University here in Hong Kong. Professor Daya Thussu, welcome to Global Ideas.
Thank you.
We also have with us Mr. Vincent Wong. Mr. Wong is currently a PhD candidate at the Hong Kong Baptist University. He has 25 years of industry experience and is a pioneer in promoting solution journalism in Asia. He got an MBA and LLB from University of Cambridge and University of London, respectively. He is a keen observer of international relations and keeps a close eye, particularly in this part of the world. Vincent Wong, welcome to Global Ideas.
Thank you. It's an honor to have me and Anilesh in today's discussion. Let's begin.
All right, so let's begin the session. First question to Dr. Swamy in India. Dr. Swamy, how would you describe the new Cold War? Is it already happening there, or do you think it is general tug of war between the countries and it is yet to cross that threshold after which we can say, oh, the Cold War has begun? Dr. Swamy, over to you, sir.
Well, the new Cold War really basically between two countries. They have the size, the GDP, and the military to be considered as in global terms. And one is the United States and the other is China. And the global war in the past was based on ideology, that is between the Soviet Union, which doesn't exist anymore, and the United States was based on ideology, military strength, displayed military strength. And I would say if there was any, these are all hardwares, but if there was any software, it was perhaps in disinformation. The present Cold War is far more sophisticated, and it is based on cyber warfare, electronics, artificial intelligence, which is developing state just now. And so therefore, it's a whole new ball game, so to speak. And at the present, I think only the United States and China qualified to be considered candidates for the Cold War. And this is sophistication requires analysis also to be very sophisticated, and it cannot be in any more army generals as per se or battlefields and so on. And so, therefore, interesting times are ahead.
Right, right. So it's about cyber war, it's about AI, sophisticated technology, GDP, and economy. There's a lot to take in. We will try to delve into all of them, but going back to the India-China questions, that we'd like to begin the session properly with India and China question. Now, Professor Thussu, you have long held this position, and you worked on a project related to BRICS media, where you said that the understanding of the Chinese and Indians vis-a-vis each other is very, very feeble. So do you still believe that?
Yes, I think it's not a particularly original argument, because there is extraordinary evidence to show that that is the case. If you look at how much India expertise there is in Chinese universities, for instance, or Chinese think tanks, you'll have to look very hard to find somebody who has that level of expertise, as against a think tank or a university in the United States or in Europe. Similarly, China expertise in India is extremely limited. I had the privilege to do my PhD in a notorious university in South Delhi, which gets a very bad name these days, although the Foreign Minister of India and the Finance Minister of India, as well as the person who heads the Niti Aayog, were students there. So even in that university, you have to look really hard to find people with real expertise on China. So I'm saying this in front of Dr. Swamy, who is one of the rare individuals in Indian public life who has Mandarin expertise and China expertise, having taught Chinese courses in Harvard University. So that's the kind of at the intellectual level. But actually, if you think of mass media, something that's what I study, and you look at what kind of coverage does India receive in mainstream Chinese media and vice versa. If you forget the business pages, because that's a very different discussion, actually the coverage is lamentably very, very low. And also not just the quantity is limited, but the quality is also very limited. So, and I think it's not just a problem between India and China, it's a wider problem. As you mentioned, I was involved in this major project on BRICS media, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And one thing we found very strikingly in that project was that very little intra-BRICS exchange, not just China, India, India, Russia, India, Brazil, China, Brazil is very limited, because most of it is mediated through dominant media structures, which are based in the United States and to some extent the UK. So it's a structural problem. And I think, given that China is India's most important neighbor, so that lack of expertise also has then very serious geopolitical and cultural implications. And I think, especially in this the evolving Cold War context, I think that's a gap which needs urgent attention.
All right.
And
also from the Chinese side, by the way, because they have very little expertise and interest in India also.
In terms of what could be the way forward, we will definitely ask Dr. Swamy, and there is no dearth of expertise, at least on this panel. So we're very happy to have you, sir. So, but Vincent, we were talking earlier about the perception of India in the eyes of Chinese people and vice versa. Could you elaborate on that?
I think as a person who started off my career in the government and then moved to the media, I think there is a constant differences in perception among the people of a place and how the government would like the people to see them or observe them. Are there any chances that the perception of the people in both countries are different from the perception of the respective governments? Or what are the differences? Should we differentiate between the people and the government when we talk about India-China relationship? Dr. Swamy, maybe?
Well, is my voice loud enough to be heard? Because from your side, it's a little low in volume.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
First of all, according to me, and I suppose anyone who has studied the issues, we have basically one difference between India and China. that is on territory. We have no problems. We have signed a treaty not once but twice that Tibet is part of China. And I don't see any appetite in India for the large sections of opinion to say, no, we must change that. It's also not practical to change it according to me. So that's one. Second, on Hong Kong, we have taken the stand that Margaret Thatcher signed an agreement and things are moving according to that. I'm not talking about the calendar, but I certainly think that it was always intended that Hong Kong will be a part of China once again. And then the economy will continue for some time to be what it was, but the Chinese mainland economy also became market, so that was not a issue. So nobody takes interest in the issue of Hong Kong because we think it's primarily the responsibility of Britain which signed the agreement, whether the agreement has been violated or not. Third is we have absolutely no interest in Taiwan. Like other countries, including China, we have commercial relations with Taiwan. But we have from day one in 1950 always regarded Taiwan as part of China. So therefore, we have no issue on that. But we do have an issue on the border. And I'll break that into two in terms of perception of government and perception of the public. And what the issue in my mind is, in the eastern sector, there was a line drawn by a British civil servant called McMahon. And he, according to the book, in my book, I've given all these details, the Himalayan challenge. That line was never ratified by the British government. In fact, the British government opposed it. That's on record. Tibet also opposed it, but the Tibetan, the Tibetan person in the negotiation, Longen Shastra or something like that, he was persuaded to sign. By what means I can't say, but he signed it and he was disowned by Tibet. Of course, China never accepted this negotiation. So as far as the McMahon line is concerned, it was wrong for us to claim that we have a legally valid claim, but there's one shall I say, caveat, as the Indians call it, in this, and that is that the Chinese voluntarily agreed to the McMahon line as the border between Myanmar and Tibet. And it's in the form of an agreement. And it's not something I'm saying now, I've been saying many times. In fact, I've said it in China to Chinese leaders also. So if you have accepted with Myanmar without difficulty the McMahon line, I don't see why China should not accept the McMahon line for the rest of the line, which is in Arunachal, which divides Arunachal from Tibet. So this is one aspect on which Indian public doesn't know this because the propaganda was let loose, the Chinese have let us down, this, that, and we're calling them brothers and this, that, in order to protect Jawaharlal Nehru, who should have insisted before the Tibet 1954 agreement was signed, as his deputy prime minister in writing told him to do, to settle it. And then make the overall Tibet thing. Of course, nobody was against Tibet being taken over. And I get sometimes demonstrations outside my house from Tibetans because I say that throughout the history of the Dalai Lama, including this present Dalai Lama, he of course is a religious leader, is welcome in India every time. We are great believers in Buddhism. as we consider now, it is a part of the overall framework. So there, the Dalai Lama could not be appointed unless Beijing ratified it. Including this, even in the Chiang Kai-shek period, the present Dalai Lama, when he was anointed, he was ratified by Beijing.
Right.
The authorities.
But Dr. Swamy, sorry to interject, but it was going back to the question of perception. If I got it correct,
I'm saying the perception is that there is a difference between legality and reality. And that perception is what I was coming to, that the government has not been upfront in putting out what the legality is. And that would have modified greatly the reality as perceived. Right now, people think the Chinese are anti-religious, they're communists, and their poor Dalai Lama has been driven out of his country, all that, and that we mistakenly gave away Tibet. By the way, we gave away Tibet twice. Once when Nehru was there, and the other was when Vajpayee was there in 2003. He signed another treaty, which was much more extensive, including recognizing the division of Tibet into 4 provinces, of which 3 have been merged with neighboring neighboring states of China. So it's no use talking about perception and of the government and the people unless the legality issues is clarified.
Okay,
and people get angry with me, but I think we have an issue, and that is 1993. We drew a line called the line of control. Unfortunately, it was not drawn on the ground. It was just a map. I mean,
so Dr. Swamy,
Yeah.
would it be fair to conclude on the basis of what you said that the perception also rises from how much information do normal people have, whether in India and China? And as student of media and communication, it's really important for us to understand how much information is being put out by the media and how much people understand on the basis of information put out there. But because you also keep going back to the issue of policy, you bring Jawaharlal Nehru, you talk about Dalai Lama and all.
Yes.
So let me ask you a question on policy, and Professor Thussu can come on this. Professor Thussu, I'll take you to this. I'll take this to you, and then probably you can
Before
answer
you
this.
go, just one addition, very short addition. Perception on the legality, yes, it's flawed. But perception on the ground of what has happened since 2016, and especially in the last 2 years, that's something which government is not admitting to, but it has filtered to the public. The reality is with the public perception and not to the government.
And if the government all over the world started accepting what is reality on the ground, the world would be completely different. But anyway, so Professor Thussu, you have been teaching globalization and media for long. And so if you can just help us understand what was the foreign policy of China and India during the First Cold War and today, and particularly if international relations is all about business and hardcore business and mutual interest, why is it failing today, Professor Thussu?
I mean, there are very strong differences between the so-called First Cold War and Second Cold War, in the sense that, as Dr. Swamy alluded to, the First Cold War had an ideological basis to it. It was a very different world. And if you think of both India and China within that so-called bipolar world that is between, Soviet Union and Washington, everything else is like to fit into these 2 poles. That was never the case. The Sino-Soviet split took place way back in the 1950s. So the Chinese had their own version of communism. India also had, again, it's much maligned today, but it did have a policy which was non-aligned. They were not part of any of the camps. And I think we sometimes ignore this fact that precisely because we were not part of either of the camps, we had a certain autonomy, whether that is strategic autonomy or intellectual autonomy, that has retained in Indian universities, Indian discourse, Indian politics. And I think that's an important point to emphasize. And because of that, India did have a voice. It was not a very strong voice, but it had a voice to articulate that what was called the third world perspective in global affairs. In the current situation, it's a very different world. The rise of China is very significant, and its impact is felt everywhere, except including us in India. I think it's, although we talk about Cold War 2.0, it is still, more of an intellectual idea than the ground realities. As Dr. Swamy pointed out, it's really in US and China, and there are various reasons why it is mapping out in a certain way. But of course, it has implications for others. I mean, India, for instance, is increasingly being seen close to the West more broadly, and the United States in particular, and that creates a certain tension within the, say, think of an organization like BRICS or SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where China and India sit together and discuss global affairs. And if they're seen as part of different blocks, not a concrete sense, but veering towards a particular position, that creates its own set of problems. So I think it's there are very interesting differences between the two versions of Cold War, and I would also say that the Cold War 2.0 is still very early, in very early stages, so it is unfair to make kind of definitive statements about it. And I think, as in the first Cold War, the Indian situation will still be, if you're not ambivalent, but would be slightly more autonomous. For simple reason, India is too big and too complex to be part of a very clear alliance. I think there are too many constraints, too many pressures. We are still buying a lot of our arms from Russia, for instance. We are still, I think it's sometimes we forget that, apart from China and Pakistan, India doesn't have very serious problems with any country. And for in these two cases also, there are very specific reasons why there might be issues. So I think I expect, this might be an optimistic view, I expect that that certain autonomy that existed in the first Cold War will continue to exist in case of India in the new version.
Right. And Dr. Swamy began his answer by talking about the first question when I asked him. You talked about technology, AI, and we will definitely ask you. But before that, a quick response from Vincent. Let's talk about what is called the elephant in the room, the United States of America. And Vincent, and Swamy is laughing now. So Vincent, how do people in China see this India-China issue, particularly on social media? Because Swamy is very active on social media. So give a sense from your side.
Yes, definitely. I think between the first Cold War and the so-called second Cold War, technology moved or advanced drastically. And I think some people in China, particularly social media users, believe or continuously discuss that the United States is the reason for the strained China-India relationship. Would you agree with that, or how would you react to social media views like that?
I think the only thing that's responsible for the strained relations between the United States, between India and China at the people's level, is the fact that we believe that you have crossed, the Chinese PLA has crossed the line of actual control, which was a mutually agreed line, and are in occupation of areas in Depsang and other places in Ladakh. And we in India, the public is not in favor of negotiations at all. They say if China is a friend and wants to say that this is part of their thing, they should first cross back across the LAC and then negotiate with us. But the Indian government is going against public perception two ways. First, the Prime Minister is yet to say that China is on territory which was considered India under the 1993 agreement. And the foreign ministry officials and the national security officials, they are maintaining that China has yet not crossed the LAC. So I think there is a big division between the public and the government. And fortunately for BJP, I'm on the side of the public. So BJP can, in a future situation, say that, what was earlier the stand is not really decided by BJP as a party. So anyway, the fact of the matter is that I don't think that any negotiations between India and China, whether the United States is influential or not. United States, by the way, its influence has now started waning after the initial enthusiasm, because we have been doing things which, what he talks about the autonomy, Professor Daya just now talked about the sense of autonomy. We have been passively autonomous, not actively autonomous, as in the non-aligned movement, by participating in BRICS, participating in SCO. Now I think we are also participating in a Chinese proposed military exercise with Pakistan in it. I think, and then the visit of the Prime Minister to the United States has been much less than expected. And we started on Quad with the Americans, and then now the Americans have split that into a number of Quads, and reduced us to environment, and reduced to the Quad to the one in which we are, to environment and I think vaccination.
Right. So I think that is why it becomes a very complex issue, because we start discussing from one point and it just snowballs into something else. It starts from border issues and it goes into environment. So there's no easy answer to any of the questions that we're asking. Sorry, go ahead, Professor Thussu.
Sorry, I was just going to add another dimension to this India-China relation, which has not been mentioned, which is the enormous trade imbalance between India and China. Issues surrounding surveillance and data, etc., which are connected to the Cold War argument, if you like. The banning of TikTok, for instance, which had the largest audience in the world in India last year, and other apps. So I wonder whether Dr. Swamy would like to reflect on that economic dimension, because after all, you are a very eminent economist, and if it not been for some of the circumstances, you probably would have got a Nobel Prize for it.
Well, when I was Commerce Minister, the first trade agreement was signed by me in Beijing in February 8th of 1991. And till that time, we didn't have any trade agreements at all, and the Chinese were actually declining the past governments, but I was able to sweet talk them into signing it, and they did sign it. And trade has grown tremendously, but finished products come from China and raw materials go from India. That's the broad thing, and that's made a lot of us unhappy. We think that it's a friendly exchange, then it should be a little bit of both on both sides. Certainly, China's finished products are great craze in India. iPhones, even Diwali, our festival, firecrackers come from China. And I was told that the great big long, a huge statue of Sardar Patel built by Narendra Modi was also made in China. So therefore, China and India have a long history. I may make a short point before handing it back to you. China and India have a very long history. It has never, unlike Europe, even have one single conflict all through history. The first conflict took place in 1962. So the mutual respect of the Chinese people for the culture of China, in my case, the cooking of China also, I like the Chinese vegetarian foods the best. I sometimes prefer it to even my own country's food. So there's so much about China which impresses people. The progress you've made has had a huge impact. But because we came after long years of fighting foreigners in our country and finally splitting the country to get independence from the British, we are very sensitive about territory. And that's where it has all been derailed.
But from the sensitive issue, I think let's go back to now some solution-oriented conversation. Like I was watching one of your interviews, Dr. Swamy, in which you say that India, China, and US should somehow come together, work on some projects to diffuse tension. But some would say that is a normative position. You know, it's how it should be. But do you think it's realistic, Dr. Swamy?
No, in the first decade of the 21st century, I held a conference in India where Harvard University scholars came, Tsinghua University scholars came. Many of my students at Harvard are now professors in Tsinghua. And I had a research institute in a university in Kerala. So we held it in Kerala and it was taken very seriously. There were all top scholars who had connections with government and so on. So we have lost ground. There's no question about it. This triangular relationship, that is the best way without us being formally aligned with any of the other, but still having a common cause for world peace. So that has to come back, but for that, India has to recover because the last 7 years of Mr. Modi's rule, our economy has performed pretty miserably. And I've written a book on it called Reset, which you might, if you send me your address, I'll send you a free copy, where I've talked about how the economy has literally gone one way down without any cycles. It's literally, and so now we are not considered anywhere near China. So therefore, we can't be part of the triangle. But other things we are the second largest population, very close to becoming first in another 10 years. GDP, which is third largest in PPP terms, that is purchasing power parity terms. And we got a huge agricultural area, which has the lowest yield per acre. So the potential of India is tremendous to become in the same league as the United States and China. But at this stage, I don't think I can talk about it. And certainly any cooperation with China without the Ladakh area being vacated, but I find it's going to be very tough.
So I'm coming to you, Vincent, but before that, a quick reply from Professor Daya Thussu. Professor Thussu, Dr. Swamy refers to the potential that India has and how amazing China's growth story has been. But the question is, what do you do with this potential? Like, for example, a lot of experts recently warned Australia, saying that, it's better that you don't side openly with the United States. When it comes to India, what are the choices, or do we have any options other than siding with the US? Or, what are the real prospects of India getting closer to China? What do you do with these organizations like Quad and AUKUS, Professor Thussu?
Quad, as Dr. Swamy already mentioned, it's not the most important grouping in the world, and especially with the latest development in terms of the nuclear submarine potential supply to to Australia, which also has, by the way, has implications on NPT, how it sort of violates the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. But that's a different discussion. The point is that, you know, India will always be, this is my view, I might be wrong. I don't think it can be a camp follower in the way, you know, European countries are to the United States. It will always have a certain amount of contestation, certain amount, for various reasons, including the level of our development. I think one thing that we perhaps could learn from China is how they've dealt with eliminating, or maybe it's a strong word, but considerably reducing extreme poverty. You know, they had at the beginning of 1990s, this is like 20 years after they had opened up their economy to international finance, they had 700 million plus people living in extreme poverty. At that time in India, that figure was about 300 million plus. Last year, China officially announced that they have eliminated extreme poverty. And India still has up to 200 million people living in extreme poverty. In fact, the largest number of poor people in the world live in our country. So there is something to be said, you know, is there something that we could learn from that model? Forget about the politics of it, but the actual change on the ground. I had the privilege to travel to rural China. I was when I was working in London, I was research advisor to the China Media Center for many years. And in that capacity, I had the privilege to go to China, lecture in various universities. Unlike Dr. Swamy, I don't have Mandarin. And unlike him, I'm also not that keen on Chinese food. But you know, but I did have that first-hand experience. It was not just organized by the party or the, you know, you could see the level of development that has reached even the poorest parts. So I think there's something that India should, and I've said this publicly in so many places, not to the, you know, not the best reception in India, for instance, especially in these days of nationalism. But it's an objective reality that if you have to compare yourself in terms of scale and scope, China is the only country you can compare. And China has delivered, we have not. So we have to ask, you know, despite this amazing democratic system, this whole tradition of debate and argumentation and fantastic people like Professor Swamy in public life, why have we not? So it's a fundamental question to ask. And I think, you know, so Quad and all these other things, they come much later. Fundamentally, if you want to be taken seriously globally, you got to deal with the most pressing problem, which is of economic governance, which is to make majority of Indian citizens live a decent life, which is what they deserve.
Right, and I'm also not an expert on economy, but I simply follow Dr. Subramanian Swamy's social media profile, and he has tons of suggestions. And you don't have to be really an expert on economy to understand what he's saying really makes sense. And I remember particularly during the pandemic, Dr. Swamy, you said, why doesn't the ruling party open its headquarters for people to be quarantined or to be hospitalized there? And it simply made sense that, you know, when you were running out of hospital beds, that could be an obvious place of choice for people to be allowed to stay there. I'll ask about it, Dr. Swamy, about your suggestions to the government and why they are not paying heed to that. But Vincent, you are an expert on media and a pioneer in solution journalism. Now, we are seeing a rise of nationalism in India, in China, I mean, Britain, in France, everywhere, right? So can you give us a sense about why is there a sudden rise of nationalism everywhere? And do you think it does anything to people's perception, people's understanding, and especially India-China relations? Vincent?
I think the rise of the social media, or let's say the embodiment of social media in our lives, actually changed the narratives and how we see the world completely, if I may. Because I know Dr. Swamy from the social media, and now I finally meet you via Zoom. And that becomes the day-to-day interaction mode of us now. And I don't think we're going to change it very soon, even when the pandemic is settled, and it becomes our new mode of interactions, not only communications, but interaction with each other. And that's actually have a profound impact on people's interactions, people's views about the world. So I think what the Dr. Swamy said earlier about passive autonomy in the Cold War relationship is quite interesting, because we are all passive in a way because we are all in this virtual world right now. And I would like to ask Dr. Swamy and also the professor, how should we interpret the role of social media if there's a Cold War 2.0? Are we really having a Cold War 2.0, or is it the media or even the academics try to put all the countries in the Cold War frame so that we can have a fruitful discussion, including the one we are having right now? So that we can create content to continuously to entertain the media, the people, and all that. Is it even real? Are we really in a Cold War relationship? Is doing some active engagement, like solution proposed by Dr. Swamy, let's eliminate or break the narrative by doing something together, then we can move on to a new world. How would you react to that, Dr. Swamy?
What you say is very appealing. As I told you, it's in my analysis of India today, I think we have run into a roadblock which we have to clear. And that is Ladakh. You may say, what are you fighting about small pieces of land? I said, in that case, China is 3 times bigger than us in their territory. It can lay claims, but it should negotiate, but not by sitting here and then negotiate. I mean, I'm against the government negotiating with China because it appears that with China sitting on the territory which we think was mutually agreed in 1993, in 1962, I don't really blame China. In fact, my book Himalayan Challenge has reproduced a transcript of the talk between Mao Zedong and Khrushchev, which makes it very clear that he was most reluctant to use military force. And I know from our end, we were being encouraged by all kinds of forces to do so, to take military action. So coming back to the point, I would say that there should be perhaps first a political dialogue as to how to get back our relationship in back on the rails, so to speak. What is it that we can do? What is it that China can do? And I'm saying that this is a very small thing from, I believe in the requirements of the situation. And till that happens, the Indian people are not going to accept any in fact, the Prime Minister has lost a lot of ground. And you can see that in social media also, the criticism that is being made. And nobody wants to be a junior partner of the United States either. So therefore, make it easy for us in India by doing the small things. Just pull back. Maybe the timing would be always very important, because at the moment we are nearing some elections and people will think that you have done it to help Mr. Modi to get re-elected. So perhaps you could delay that a bit. But certainly, I think without that, no progress between India and China's relations can take place.
Vincent, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, Dr. Swamy, if I may, you mentioned about passive autonomy in this role between the United States and China. But would China or US or even India would be, if I say, passive aggressive? So being passive in order to make a stance and let the people do the work. Or in social media, because you have been very active in social media. How do you see the role of social media users in international relationship?
Our social media is dominated by foreign interests. we yet have not been able to do it. We have an Indian one, but it's not taking off. And so I think social media is not the right place. Right now, the right place is emotion.
Mm.
If I can make one emotional move, today I have a big name in the country because I've been so aggressive about the situation on our border. In fact, your GSTN or CGTN TV has called me the most hated figure in China. I don't know if it's true or not, but certainly that has helped me in India if it's not helped me in China. So because I am the only person who's saying aggression has taken place, it's a violation of the mutually agreed treatment, and they must go. And this has given me enormous leeway to do things. And for tomorrow I have to say that we should now, in view of step 1, step 2, improve, return back to the old thing and improve our relations with China, people will accept it politically.
But Swamiji, yes. I don't think you are hated in China. I think, as far as I know, I think after 1962, you were the first Indian politician who was sent on an official visit to talk to the Chinese. And before I ask this question about social media, and Professor Thussu has been talking about the rise and probably the potential of what could be described as an Indian internet, I'll ask Professor Thussu about it. But Dr. Swamy, please reveal, why is it that in the decades of Indian history that we see, especially in terms of India-China relations, you are the only politician who has been given unprecedented and unparalleled access by the Chinese authorities and government? What makes you so special? Why do you have this certain special relationship with the Chinese? I don't trust that people hate you there. But yeah, why have you been so close?
Well, first of all, I'll tell you a secret, which I've not publicized. In 1980, Chinese economy was in shambles. And McNamara was the president of the World Bank. And he wanted to give Chinese a fat loan, for which the Chinese said we can't pay the normal interest rate, so you have to give us concessional. There's a category called concessional category, in which India got 40% of the money, and the other countries who are unable to have an economic problem, they got the remaining 60%. So when that, so McNamara said this to Mrs. Gandhi, that we are going to share your 40% now with the Chinese. And she protested. And she quoted a number of American scholars on the per capita income of China, which was above 400, which was the cutoff point for it. And mine was the only study published by the University of Chicago Press, which said that China's per capita income in 1980 was $250, more or less on par with India. And McNamara accepted that. And Mrs. Gandhi, in fact, called all the economists and the officials of India to hold a seminar to prove my estimates are wrong. And I was asked to lead that seminar. And I proved that what I said was based on Chinese data after correction for various prices and things like that. So that led to the Chinese ambassador coming and expressing thanks. And the next thing I know is I got an invitation for Chairman Deng Xiaoping. And I had a one-to-one meeting with him. And I made a request to him that he should allow Indian Hindu pilgrims to go to Kailash Mansarovar, which the Chinese had not agreed since 1949. So he agreed. And in my book, I have reproduced that conversation with Deng Xiaoping. That led to the thaw in India. And therefore, the Chinese felt that here's a man who's, I think that's what they think. And of course, I had many Chinese students at Harvard who had come back to Tsinghua and Beijing and university and so on. So there was a lot of bonhomie.
And I definitely think that I think you are the probably one of the rare politicians and authors from India who has an amazing and wonderful picture with a Chinese premier on his book. So okay. So but let's move on.
If I can take 30 seconds to cite a Chinese proverb. Tiempo pa, tiempo pa, jopa, yangwei zi hui shou zhong gu hua. Which translated means don't fear the foreigner, don't fear the gods, but do fear don't fear the gods, don't fear the devil, but do fear the foreigner who can speak in Chinese.
Yeah, that's a good one. Professor Thussu, yeah, please go ahead. And also, if you could,
I just have a very short follow-up question, which is that given, this is addressed to Dr. Swamy, given your extensive expertise and knowledge and context in China, why is it that despite having this very strong tension between India and China, last 2 years particularly, why hasn't the government of India tried to use your expertise to resolve this? I mean, because you have a track record of doing it and doing it at the highest level.
I did it for Narasimha Rao, yes. I believe that from whatever I've learned, that Mr. Modi, for what I consider absurd reasons, thinks of me as an alternative, as a competitor. And I'm not only known as an economist, but I'm also known as a man who fought the emergency. I have a political standing. And he has been not only against me, but he has been against many others who he considers would be political problems for him, political challenge to him. And so he has kept me out of that in everything. The only force which is keeping me intact, because many others intellectuals have been pushed out of the party in the last 4 or 5 years. Mr. Arun Chori is very well known. He was expelled. Mr. Former Finance Minister, Mr. Yashwant Sinha, was expelled. Shatrughan Sinha. So I think that's the only reason. There is no other reason. I've been a minister twice before, and the Prime Minister never had a problem. But in his case, it is general problem. I mean, it's a malady.
I think that, if one were to study the relations that Dr. Swamy has with his own party, one would have to create a whole department at a university, because it's nothing less than I mean, there was a wonderful letter written by the Indian Prime Minister on his birthday, and if one reads the letter, I mean, he has all the well wishes in the world for Dr. Swamy, and still he's not a part of the cabinet. So you just don't understand the relations. And unlike
as long as I'm outside the party, he will be very nice. In fact, the first BRICS president was proposed by Modi to the BRICS committee, and I was selected, and I was offered the position. I declined to go. I said, left Harvard to come to India. I'm not going to go abroad again.
So you are inside Hindu ideology, outside the government, inside the party, and outside the policy. So it's an interesting position. But Professor Daya Thussu, going to what Vincent alluded earlier about the role of social media and the role of social media in this wider Cold War 2.0 paradigm, you have been talking about India's internet, if ever that is going to be a possibility. Why do you keep focusing on India's internet? And what is your problem with the internet in the rest of the world? Professor Thussu, and then we'll go to Dr. Swamy.
Well, India has the largest open internet in the world, because the Chinese one is not open. But unlike the Chinese one, Indian internet is not Indian in the sense that the platforms that Indians use are essentially American. The data goes to American companies. They have governance structures. They have the finance. The money goes to them. So I'm intrigued by why hasn't India been able to develop its own platform, given that it is seen as a major IT power. The two major companies in the world in this field, Microsoft and Google, are run by people who had their first degrees in India. So they are not American Indians, they're Indians who work in America. Like I'm Indian, I work in Hong Kong. That distinction is very significant. So why is it that we've not been able to develop an infrastructure which sustains an Indian internet? And I'm actually optimistic now because there is a very interesting convergence happening between a very pro-business government as well as major corporates. For example, Geo has transformed internet. So I feel in the next decade something emerging like an Indian internet will be there. But but we don't want the kind of Chinese model also, where the state has total control on what can be and cannot be said. India has a very open internet, and that's one of the strengths of that internet. Although in terms of nationalism and discourses about whether it's about personalities or issues, often it gets extremely because it's unregulated. So all kinds of issues are in the public domain, which also has serious implications on perception, especially. There's a lot of, as you probably know, this whole idea of WhatsApp University, people getting informed about the world through forwarded messages from retired people. So that's another problem.
So having a strong technology in the field of communication, Dr. Swamy, is it going to bring countries together, or is it going to further create more rift? And do you think that is going to be a problem in this new Cold War paradigm?
Oh, it's a question of a new culture which has to be developed, of frankness. And see, the question of meeting frequently, Xi Jinping met Modi 18 times one-to-one over 6 years. And then Modi, internally in the party, we are told that Xi Jinping never told us that they had a dispute with us across the LAC. I don't know if it's true or not, but the fact is, the matter is, I haven't heard it directly from the Prime Minister, I've heard it from my party colleagues. So therefore, I think it's not enough to have communication media, but there must be a sense of frankness. And that was there I think in the 1980s when I went to China, all through when I used to go once a year for the World Peace Forum meeting of the Tsinghua University every year. And we used to have very frank discussion. But today, this all spin. So, and that gets multiplied as a multiplier effect on social media.
Vincent, last comments about, because as Professor Daya Thussu talked about an Indian internet, potential internet, and also, but it shouldn't be largely controlled by the state. Now, given your expertise on solution journalism, do you think that if internet is completely controlled, or do you think it is possible to completely control internet? China may be an exception, but even there, people are somehow exposed to what is happening in the rest of the world. Somehow the global content infiltrates. Do you think that it is possible to completely cut the rest of the world and the flow of information in this day and age, Vincent?
I think the problem that we are facing right now is that people no longer can compare solutions equally, because the social media has confined us into the so-called echo chamber. Whereas in the mass media can help people to compare, or at least tell people that this is apple and orange is different. So we have the old Cold War or the Cold War 1.0 because we still have the memories of the hot wars. But now we are comparing the Cold War with, we are comparing Cold War 2.0 with Cold War 1.0 without really contemplating a larger scale global conflicts. I think that's what we, like academics, intellectuals, should do, like letting people know how things could go if we continue to this direction. I think a sense of frankness, including the breaking of bubbles among people. So can we do that? Because we also mentioned another elephant in the room is that we have a very westernized social media. So we need the India's internet, and we already have the China's internet. But how can we communicate without or with the Western influence? How should we juggle with that? I think that's what seasoned politicians and academics like Professor Thussu, and also us, like the younger generation, should work on. Can you show us some guiding lights of how should we move forward, Dr. Swamy, Professor Thussu?
That's the hope of the future, because I have to not sound like a broken record. At the moment, I don't think this is a possibility because of what I mentioned on Ladakh. So you don't understand. I mean, I have your local diplomats who sometimes communicate with me. I'm telling them that you don't understand. This is connected with our struggle against the British. It's connected with our wars with Pakistan. And this is a very, very sentimental issue. It's made it very difficult. Congress party has become irrelevant on this issue because they are not able to take a strong stand. And tomorrow I'm in that kind of position because I've taken a strong stand. And tomorrow, if I start advocating something which is conciliatory, people will not misunderstand. So, but as of now, I don't think this is a reality. This is a real possibility.
You have always taken a strong stand. And when Vincent talked about the role of conventional media in developing the understanding on issues, I very well remember Dr. Swamy calling a very famous anchor on Indian television a dumb and liar and stupid. So I'm not sure if he's very convinced with the idea of conventional media giving you all the wisdom. Professor Thussu, a quick response, and then we'll go to the final comments.
Well, I mean, the primacy of West is a reality in our lives. So to suggest otherwise would be naive. But West, there was I think 2 years ago, this is annual Munich Security Conference, and the theme for that conference was Westlessness. So they were talking about this whole declinist argument, which is also very strong in parts of the United States. So I think there is some shift happening, and that would eventually lead to, alternative perspectives of global affairs. And I think it will, as of now, there are reasons why the West and particular parts of the West dominate. And I think that's not going to go away anytime soon. But you guys, the young people, have to think. I always say to my PhD students, come up with your own theories. Don't just rehash what has already been published. And that's a big project that takes time. And I think these kinds of conversations are also contributing to that. That's what I would hope.
Right. And final comments, Dr. Swamy, how do you see the new Cold War unraveling in the next 5 years? A bit of prediction from your side, sir.
It depends on who's going to be in power, you see. In the case of India, we have regular elections, so you cannot be sure. And then you see this, the difference that Modi has made to decision making is he has centralized it completely. And if we have somebody who's more consultative, as Narasimha Rao was, then I think we could have, and Narasimha Rao produced in a growth rate which took us from 2.5% per year to 8% within 5 years. And the whole economic reform took place. It's this consultative approach, not just flabby consultative approach. Mr. Vajpayee lost the election because he was too flabby. So I think I can't predict except to say Mr. Xi Jinping, whether he'll become more moderate, because what he has done, one has to explain why for 18 one-to-one meetings, Mr. Modi says he was never told anything about it, according to party people. So after that, suddenly this happens. So therefore, Mr. Xi Jinping, I don't know what the Chinese system is. I think he's been elected for life, if I'm not wrong. So it's going to be very difficult unless the leadership changes its attitude or the leadership itself is changed.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Dr. Swamy, all the way from India, for joining us. It was wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much, Professor Daya Thussu. Thank you very much, Vincent, for joining us in this session. That's all we have in this episode of Global Ideas. We'll see you soon. If you have any feedback and comments, do write to us, and please follow our social media page for all the latest updates regarding this series. We'll see you soon. Take care and goodbye.
Thank you.